So if you've been struggling with weak mixes, then this video will be the perfect video for you. In this video, I'm going to show you two sections. The first section is going to be me showing you the principles of things you can add to your mix bus just using stock plugins. Therefore, you can take that knowledge and you can apply it to whatever plugins you want. However, these plugins that I'm going to show you at the end of the video are incredible, and I actually bought each of these plugins with my own money before I had any relationship with PULSAR Modular because I thought they were just amazing. But to showcase an example of how these things sound, this is how my mix sounds with everything on it. If that interests you and you want to know how I went from the before and after, then stay tuned for the entirety of this video because I'm going to try and go into as much detail as possible without it being boring. So first and foremost, to figure out what I'm doing with these plugins, we have an EQ going into a saturator, going into a compressor, going into a saturator, going into an EQ, going into a limiter that I'm using as a clipper. Now, why am I doing that? The reason why I have these plugins set up in this way is because what I'm trying to do is reduce the dynamic range. That is the secret to getting loud mixes. It's taking care of your crest factor. So the first thing I'm adding is a high pass filter, and the reason for this is to get rid of any unnecessary low end. This then goes into a saturator, and what I'm using this saturator for is for clipping. So if you have anything within your DAW that does clipping, or if you have a clipper that you love to use, you can use that here as well. I'm boosting 3 dB, but my output level is set to -3 dB. Now what this is doing is it's reducing that crest factor again and increasing perceived loudness. So after this, I have the compressor. You can use anything here. I love to use a VCA compressor on my mix because a lot of the things I do are quite snappy and I want to maintain that punch. And I'm essentially doing an attack of 10 milliseconds and a release of around about 4 or 2 on an SSL, which just really tends to work great for me. Now, after this, I'm adding another saturator because essentially with the compressor, you'll find that a lot of those peaks you were controlling before, they're now a bit out of control again, and it's starting to peak above that -3 dB threshold that we had before. This time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a ceiling of -1 dB because the only thing I'm going to do after this is do a slight boost of around 1 dB on a high shelf. So I just want to make sure I give myself enough headroom to be able to do that before we go into that final stage of limiting and clipping. Then after this, I'm adding in a little bit of high end because each stage of saturation, I did notice that it was reducing the high end a little bit. So I'm just wanting to bring that back. So I'm just adding around 1 dB, a shelf at 5.5K or 5.2K for this mix, but you can really do whatever you want here to add the high end in. Maybe you only want a 10K shelf, maybe you want it as low as 2.5K. It's completely up to you, but I just want to find a way to just bring a little bit of that high end back in. So let's have a listen to what that adds. One adjustment I'm going to make is, for my personal taste, I love to hear the sound of compression. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to 100% and just play around with that compression again. Yeah, that's feeling way better. And a little trick you can do as well is if you do want to get more grit, because we do have this saturator after the compressor, you can just play with this makeup gain and just drive the signal into the saturator to get more grit. Check this out. So that's a nice little trick as well. Now, of course, for those who are the super technical folks, yes, the output of this compressor is slightly distorting as it's now going into this saturator. But at the end of the day, it's all personal preference and it's all personal taste. If you feel like that sounds better to you, then you could do it that way. However, if you want a more clean approach, then in this final stage of clipping, then you can add a limiter that has a soft clip, or you could just add any clipper that works for you as well. So let's check it out how it sounds with this clipper added on the end. So now, when we put all of that together, like I said, incremental stages, but the important thing is we controlled the signal, gave it the character we wanted before we got to that final clipper stage. So then that final clipper isn't having to work as hard to crush down a lot of the transients. This is how we've been able to maintain the punch and the clarity by the time we got to that stage. But let's hear before and after. And just to show you the importance of these other parts in the signal, because remember, when we first added in all of these things, these seemed really subtle. I'm going to bypass those and I'm just going to have the limiter by itself, which is clipping the signal, and you'll hear the difference and the impact that these modules have on how that final stage of clipping ends up working. So this is the principle that you can apply to your stock plugins in your DAW. If you want to swap out the compressor for something you love, or swap out the saturator for something you love, or swap out the EQ for something you love, put more of a character EQ in place of these EQs, you're completely free to do that. But the principle is essentially high pass filtering out any gunk low end, having a form of like saturation or clipping going into your compressor to control those peaks, using your compressor to add character and energy, following that up with a saturator or a clipper again, just to control those peaks once more, making sure we're looking after that crest factor. And you can use the output of that compressor to drive into that saturation, whatever it is, to get even more character. With your controlled signal, and you've still got that 1 dB headroom or maybe 2 dB headroom, depending on what you set the output of that clipper or saturator to, you then can do a little bit of tonal shaping. So I'm just boosting a bit of high end, but you can also take out a little bit of the mids. You can boost a bit of the mids. You can even boost a little bit of the low end if you wanted to as well. And then this final stage of clipping is just to then increase that perceived loudness even more. Now for the big reveal, to show you the plugins that I use. So this is before. That sounds mental. That sounds significantly better than the stock plugins, as it should, because these plugins were not cheap and I spent a bit of money on these, but I knew I had to, because when I was going out of the box to in the box and I sold all my analog outboard gear that I was using on my mix bus, I knew whatever plugins I have need to blow my mixes out of the water. They need to be incredible because my clients cannot notice that my mixes have dropped down a level. That was my biggest fear. And I tried so many different plugins, and PULSAR Modular, the only plugins on my mix bus that I found were actually sounding even better than that analog chain I sold. So what am I doing here? As we discussed, I'm doing a high pass filter. I'm doing it at 15 hertz here, but each EQ filter is going to be slightly different. For this particular one, I found 15 hertz high pass filter works quite well. I have the option of adding EQ, which in this case, I'm not actually doing. And then I just have a low pass filter at 20 kilohertz as well. But I'm really using this for my initial stage of saturation. It's just like tonal shaping and subtly rounding off the peaks. So let's have a listen to how that sounds. You can hear how it's just giving it that character, but I also have the power of these EQs just to showcase how powerful these can get. Check this out. Yeah, it's endless creativity with this. You've even got mix, wet, dry. You've got various different types of oversampling within this as well. Like this thing, yeah, is absolutely amazing. After this, I'm then going into my stage of compression. As I said, even though I'm using these plugins, which are incredible and really, really high quality, you can take this principle and apply it to any plugins you want. But my choice here is this P11 Abyss, which is as in-depth as you could want to go for a compressor. I mean, I'll need to do an entire video on this, but essentially what I've done is I've created and emulated a form of an SSL bus with my own kind of tone. The powerful thing with this is you have an actual sidechain EQ, so you can affect the EQ going into the compressor sidechain, which essentially is changing what part of the signal the compression is reacting to. And then I've got a high pass at 111 hertz in that sidechain filter as well, so that none of the low end is triggering it as much. And then this really amazing O2 section of this plugin, which think of it like a maximizer or just something that increases energy. The other thing that's incredible with this plugin is I also have the ability to clip the raw signal. So whereas with the other process I showed you, I had the EQ going into the clipper, in this case, I've got the clipper within my compression plugin. So the raw signal is being clipped, but I can change this to be clipping the output, clipping the main, clipping the side chain, or just turn the clipper off. But I have the raw signal being clipped. And then within this same plugin, it's actually ridiculous. PULSAR Modular smashed it out the ballpark with this. I have a limiter. So I'm also making sure that the output of this isn't getting above 0.1 in this case as well. So I'm compressing, I'm clipping, I'm limiting, and I'm maximizing within the one plugin. But let's see how this sounds before and after. So first with it. Now, as I said, because this has a clipper on the input stage, in the same way, remember, I would take the output of the compressor and drive it into saturation. Well, in this case, I can actually take the output of this and drive it into the compressor, so that compressor is actually being clipped before it starts compressing. Let's try that out quickly. So I've just increased the volume going into this so that we're getting some clipping here. But let's have a listen to how those two are sounding by themselves. Honestly, I'm sure you're realizing what I realized the first time I dragged these plugins on. I was just like, how am I achieving that with just 2 plugins? But listen, we haven't even got to the final one. You guys know how much I love the P44 Magnum. As I said, even though this is a sponsored video, I had purchased all of this plugin before I'd even began my YouTube channel. So when I did my first earlier videos, this was one of the things I reviewed, which then led to the owner of that company reaching out to me. And I was like, hey, listen, thanks for reaching out to me. But I already have bought all of your plugins. So yeah, man, I love PULSAR modular stuff. Absolutely incredible. But I'm using this to add a final stage of saturation. This also has a clipper built into it as well, which I'm setting to -0.3. And then this also has a high-end EQ and some other low-end EQs as well. And then I'm driving the input stage as well to get even more saturation. But let's just start off by setting this thing all the way down with just the clipping at 0.3, and we'll add in each of these things, and you'll see how much grit and energy and character we can get out of this as well. Like, I really don't need to promote. There's no promo that needs to be done. It's so easy to talk about these plugins, because when you go and check them, you're going to see, right, they're not cheap. But listen, like, I don't think you understand. Like, I had around 7 to 8 grand's worth of an analog chain. You need to realize that this plugin chain is keeping up with all of those things that I sold. I'll even add some videos so you can see the proof that I had all of that equipment. And getting these 3 plugins, don't compare them to other plugins. Don't compare the price to other plugins. Compare them comparatively, quality-wise, to hardware, because this guy's stuff just sounds incredible. Listen to what these 3 plugins are doing. So without it, so yeah, my name is Alex Elliott. As I promised, I showed you the principles that I apply that can be used to any different plugins to increase your mix bus chain. And then also I showed you what I'm actually using. But yeah, if you love this content, you know what to do. Like and subscribe. Other than that, I hope this was helpful. Let me know in the comments down below, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.